You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and today, March 6, 2025, we are 6 days out from the official start of free agency, and also, what are we, 3-4 days away from the legal tampering period, whatever you want to call that, where teams can start negotiating some moves and getting in some of those free agents that are going to be set to hit the market in, again, 6 days. Now, we got a lot to get into. Joey Bosa got released late last night. Big news on that front. DK Metcalf officially requesting a trade out of Seattle. We're going to talk some Bears offensive line rebuilding that we've seen over the last few days. And then at the end, we're going to play a little bit of free agency matchmaker. So definitely make sure you stick around. And if you don't have a ton of time, go check it out. It's towards the end of this. Got the chapters laid out for you guys. Very easy to find. But fire away in the comment section down below. Let me hear from you all. We will dive into that very first discussion, though. Joey Bosa. News breaking very late last night. I was actually putting the show together, trying to figure out what I wanted my, third or fourth discussion point to be for today. And then surely enough, 10:30 p.m., the tweet comes flying up on my feed here as news breaks. Tom Pelissero, Joey Bosa had a 12.36 million, roster bonus due next Wednesday. An early trigger as part of a restructure last year, forcing the Chargers to make a decision before free agency. Now his release gives him a jump start on the market. And then Adam Schefter also ended up having another tweet that I saw as well, covering kind of the details and cap that it was freeing up here, releasing five-time Pro Bowl selection Joey Bosa saves the Chargers $25.36 million against their cap, which opens up a lot for the Chargers in my eyes, a team that needs to do some working this offseason to, I would say, upgrade the offense a little bit, but also now with this release here and the potential release, or not release, but allowing to walk of Khalil Mack, there's going to be a lot of reworking going on both sides of the football now. But the first thing I want to look at is just kind of what this means for Khalil Mack, because with Khalil Mack now also set to hit free agency, he's been extremely productive, and the difference between he and Bosa, for the most part, aside from there's a large sack total there on Bosa's end, 31 just over the last 3 seasons alone, was his availability. Mack's been there all 3 years that he's been playing in LA, and he's been a force to be reckoned with. This year, maybe not nearly as productive, but last season, 17 sacks, an absolute monster. But again, 31 total over the last 3 seasons he spent in LA. This could potentially open up the door for him. When you look at some of the contract websites, it looks like Khalil Mack's due for something along the lines of like a 2, maybe even a 3-year deal if a team really wants to try to push some of the cap number down the road a little bit and just make the contract look a little bit more attractive to him. But a 2, maybe 3-year deal where you're looking somewhere along the lines of over $20 million per year. And I don't really think it's that out of the realm of possibility that Khalil Mack may end up coming back, especially when you consider, again, the productivity of Khalil Mack, needing to get a wide receiver into that locker room to work alongside Ladd McConkey. But also, wouldn't it be fun if the Chargers maybe opted to decide to go after a Josh Sweat, somebody who has looked really good over the last few years, went through that 1-year prove-it deal this past year with Philadelphia, and in my eyes proved it fairly well. Imagine the pairing, and this is a team that's already shown they're more than willing to double dip on the edge rushing side of things. They just got done with Bosa and Mack. So now if maybe you bring back Mack on that 2, maybe 3-year deal, then you go after Sweat. He's the more long-term guy. You pair those 2 guys up together on the edges of that defensive line, and holy hell, do you have yourself a pairing of pass rushers getting after the quarterback. So definitely something I'm really excited to see potentially play out. Obviously, may or may not happen, but if that's where maybe the Chargers' heads are at right now, I would be 1,000% up for seeing it. And I know you can probably say, well, freeing up that $26 million is really about trying to get a wide receiver 1 in here for LA. Of course, that is a piece of it, but I mean, there's other ways that they can move more money around. I think this just really gives them the opportunity to be very creative and have a lot of fun in free agency for a team that literally just hit the playoffs in their first year with Jim Harbaugh as their head coach. The other thing we have to look at, though, is, of course, Joey Bosa. Where does Joey Bosa come from here? Go from here, excuse me. Obviously, injury concern is a very real factor in wherever Joey Bosa winds up. 9 starts in 2024, 5 starts in 2023, 4 starts in 2022. He did play in more games beyond those numbers, but that's just games where he actively started and played through. Finding a market value on Joey Bosa, in my eyes, is kind of a difficult one because this is somebody who, even despite all the injuries he's dealt with, he's still pretty damn productive. And when he was playing full seasons, like those 16 slates of games before they jumped over to 17, and even just a few years ago when he played 16, he's racking up double-digit sack numbers. He has 10 or more in those full seasons played. It's just those years where, and they're pretty much scattered throughout his entire career to this point, where he's not able to play even sometimes 10 games in a singular season. So the market value is hard. It's one of those things where it's like, you're going to get a guy that, if he's healthy, keyword if, underline, highlight, bold, italicize, like all that, if he's healthy, he's going to be productive. But can you count on that? That's the big question here. So, like, what is the actual value? Are you looking at a long-term deal? Are you looking at a 1-year, not prove-it deal, but like rental type of deal where, like, there's a contender out there that wants to really shore up the pass rush, and they're like, all right, let's get Bosa in here. Even if we don't get a full 16 games out of him, he's going to be a complementary piece to somebody who's already leading the way on the defensive line for us. He's just going to help take us to that next level, and if all works out well, it's going to be a massive payoff for whoever signs him. But again, keyword on the if there. As for like the actual numbers, I mean, you're probably looking at a contract that flirts somewhere along the lines of $20 million a year with however many years it ends up being, maybe even a little bit less just because of the injury history. Like, I could see something in the ballpark of like 16 to 18 million. But again, Joey Bosa is highly regarded around the league, so I wouldn't be surprised, especially with the cap jumping 55 million over the last couple of years. Teams are more than willing to pay. So if it goes north of 20, no surprise there. But like, that number is definitely an interesting one. I'll be curious to see once the contract is put in an official wherever Bosa winds up next. As for the teams themselves and who I think he winds up with, I was going through the league and I'm kind of looking at all of these different teams that we could possibly see him go to. And a lot of people are flirting with like the Chiefs as an option there, or maybe a team like the Raiders, who, yes, just went and signed Max Crosby to a massive extension, but imagine pairing him with a Joey Bosa. Like, my goodness, what a wrecking crew that would be if Joey Bosa stays healthy. And then a lot of people, of course, pointing to the name San Francisco. Obviously, playing alongside his brother, I don't think two brothers could ask for much else at this stage in their career, where Nick Bosa, one of the top pass rushers in the NFL, well in the thick of the prime of his career, where Joey Bosa, he's still in that same area as well, but you may look at Bosa as slightly closer to the back end of his career, especially with the injury history. But I mean, those two running the edges over there in San Francisco, I mean, come on, let's be real. How exciting would that be? And also, again, big if, underlined, bold printed, Bosa stays healthy and you have the Bosa brothers just terrorizing quarterbacks. Nick's probably pushing towards that like 15 to 20 range. Joey's probably pushing somewhere along the lines of like that 10 to 15 range himself that we've seen him rack up in his healthy seasons. I mean, I don't really think San Francisco 49ers fans could ask for much else. As for like where I think he actually winds up, I don't really think I have a true answer, just because this is so sudden and not something that I was anticipating. I figured that they were going to allow Khalil Mack to walk in LA, and then they were going to try to, hopefully Joey Bosa has a healthy season. But it's also not super surprising to see this happen in hindsight now. If I was to land on a spot, and I'm kind of torn on this one, it's probably San Fran or Kansas City. Kansas City is about chasing a ring. Charles Omenihu, who's going to be departing from there this offseason potentially. And then on top of that, you have George Karlaftis, yes, and Chris Jones. Maybe you could get Joey Bosa to join Kansas City on a lesser deal monetarily and then ultimately chase that ring. But in my eyes, if I was to lean one way or the other between San Fran and Kansas City, it's probably the 49ers, just because, again, playing alongside his brother probably means more to him than anything else at this point, even if it is. And I mean, it's not like San Francisco hasn't been ring chasing the last handful of years. Yes, last season, bit of a disaster, don't get me wrong, but you bring him in there, that definitely shores up the defensive line. There are some areas that seem like they're going to be receiving some sort of work as we go through this offseason. We already saw the Deebo Samuel trade. Then there's obviously the rumor mill spinning right now in regards to Brandon Ayuk, and we've talked about that on the show as well. Check that out if you're a 49ers fan. But if I had to guess, it's probably San Francisco, but like Kansas City is a close second in my eyes, just because, again, the ring chase is real, and I really like the idea of it. Now, there was other big news yesterday. There was a lot of big news yesterday, don't get me wrong, but these are just some of the biggest ones that really stuck out to me here. We've got to discuss, of course, the DK Metcalf sweepstakes. News broke about 1 hour after it was announced that Tyler Lockett was going to be let go. You can see the tweet up on the screen here from Tom Pelissero, again getting a ton of screen time on today's show with his tweets. Two-time Pro Bowl wide receiver DK Metcalf has requested a trade, and the Seahawks have agreed to explore options, sources tell me and Rap Sheet. Days before free agency, the 27-year-old Metcalf immediately becomes the top receiver available, and I could not agree more. In a class of wide receivers where there's just so many uncertainties surrounding, it feels like all the top guys, whether it's age, injury, production over the last year or two for the wide receiver, this is not necessarily the prettiest wide receiver free agent market. And when Chris Godwin is your top guy, and don't get me wrong, big fan of Chris Godwin's game, but coming off of the injury that he's coming off of and just having what seems like a bit of an injury issue now with the right leg that he has, it is a little bit scary. If he gets back from that and he manages to get out of Tampa Bay this offseason and he hits the free agent market and he's fine, I mean, I'm here for it. I like Chris Godwin. I think he's great. But DK Metcalf, I mean, 6'4", 235 pounds, 4.3 speed. Like, come on. Like, the dude is a mountain of a man and moves like he's 5'11" and maybe 200 pounds soaking wet. So it's unbelievable that you have the opportunity to get a guy like this for any team that needs a wide receiver right now. 438 career receptions, 6,324 yards, got 48 touchdowns to boot. He is coming off of what I would argue like is his least productive year since his rookie season. Maybe not yardage wise, but when you look at like yards to touchdown ratio in every other season, the closest example would be like his first initial season. And it just kind of feels like he may have fallen a little bit out of the pecking order, with Jackson Smith and Jigba really stepping up and looking like the premier number one wide receiver over there in Seattle. And it looks like there is a bit of a shift going on with that offense there. So him potentially stepping out on Seattle and being traded to somewhere else honestly seems somewhat realistic to me in my eyes. I feel like trying to keep a wide receiver in the building that does not want to be there, and it doesn't have to do with the money that they're being paid, just typically never really works out. And you don't want that kind of tension in the locker room. You want people that want to be where you are. So this is something that I do think leads to an inevitable split. But the big thing that I'm really curious about is just what the compensation is, because and literally this morning I'm at the gym just scrolling through my phone in between sets, and I'm seeing that Seattle's looking for a first and third round selection for the draft this year for the services of DK Metcalf. And I mean, last night when I was thinking about this and writing in my notes here, I have noted, a high second round or like low first round pick seems like within the ballpark, because you also have to consider there is the extension that is going to need to be paid out to DK Metcalf because he's on the final year of that deal. So, I mean, you're looking for something along the lines of probably $30 million a year. I believe that's been reported as well, in the ballpark of what he wants to see. That's where the wide receiver market is going right now. And, a lot of people will have you believe that DK Metcalf isn't necessarily the greatest wide receiver in the world. And it's kind of funny because the numbers that he has put up are very similar to a Randy Moss through the first 6 seasons of Moss's career. So I don't really see why people wouldn't feel that way. The problem is just, again, the draft compensation plus the contract extension does muddy the waters of this potential deal a bit. Looking at teams that make sense to me in my eyes, the first one we have to discuss is, of course, the Green Bay Packers, just because this is already kind of rumored to be in the works, and it's something that's been discussed and something I've seen get thrown around a lot the last week or so. Obviously, Green Bay has Christian Watson, Jaden Reeds, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, and Dontavian Wicks, but no true number one wide receiver. You have a ton of guys that are like number twos, number two ABs, just really strong, good wide receivers, but they're not quite that number one. And DK Metcalf, in my eyes, could be that final piece of the puzzle. And also, with Green Bay, you have the opportunity to maybe offer up if you really wanted to. And I know a lot of people are saying Green Bay has to pick with the draft in Green Bay this year. While, yes, that is true, you don't necessarily have to make a pick on draft day. If this is something that between now and the draft doesn't get dealt, maybe we see that draft day trade for DK Metcalf from Green Bay, so you still get to like make the selection on draft day kind of deal. Like that would be a fun way to do that in my eyes. But I like the idea of him going to Green Bay, and you can offer up one of these wide receivers to be able to facilitate that trade. So this way you're only giving up a first-round pick and maybe a body, as opposed to a first-round pick and a third-round pick plus the $30 million extension. Then you got to figure out what you're going to do with one of these four wide receivers, because while it's nice to have five wide receivers in the room that you could probably count on, there is a point where you have that does get clogged up, and it becomes an issue down the road eventually. But I really like the idea of Green Bay. Another team that's on here, but this is more so out of their necessity, but is probably not going to happen based on the reporting that I've been seeing, and that's the New England Patriots, who, in my eyes, don't even really have a clear number two at this current moment here. I do think there probably is a number two on that roster, and it's probably Pop Douglas, but beyond that, there's really not a whole lot in the cabinet, or at least not a whole lot of known in the cabinet right now. So this one is just kind of an obvious talking point in my eyes, but the rumors and the reports are that Josh McDaniels doesn't see him as a fit in the system. And as somebody who works in the New England media market for the Patriots, I will say this, not for the Patriots, but with where the Patriots play. Don't want to misrepresent myself there, but I do work within New England sports media, and I've got to say, listening to some of the talk show hosts rattle off their disbelief that the New England Patriots are kind of willing to point their nose in the air to people because they don't think their scheme fits is a little bit crazy to me in my eyes. I understand Josh McDaniels' system is a little bit more complicated. It typically requires more sophisticated route runners, but at the same time, we're talking DK Metcalf, who immediately becomes a legit number one threat with his size, his speed, his potential upside with production in that offense. And I mean, you want to talk about Drake May and his style of play, and we saw a lot of it from him last year, his willingness to put the ball up and let a receiver go and get it. Like, DK Metcalf is literally that guy. He is a physical beast when it comes to the point of attack when getting the football. So it's like, I love the idea of it, but to hear that the Patriots might be out because McDaniels doesn't see him as a scheme fit is just kind of crazy to me. Another team I have, they don't have a quarterback, and that is definitely something that needs to be addressed, and partially why I'm not super sold on this one here, but it does bring up the conversation of if they target a quarterback through free agency or maybe a trade or something over the next few days. The Raiders. Yes, you don't have a QB, but you do have Brock Bowers. You do have Jacoby Myers. Brock Bowers emerging as possibly the best tight end in the NFL already after one season, earning All-Pro honors his first year. But then you also have Jacoby Myers, who he's one of the best number twos in the NFL in my eyes. And this is somebody that, going back to the Patriots, I cannot believe they allowed him to walk and then opted to go with Juju Smith-Schuster instead, who had one knee. So Jacoby being one of the best number twos in the NFL, 1,000-yard receiver last year, Brock Bowers, 1,000-yard tight end last year. You have the opportunity now to throw in a guy like DK Metcalf, who, yes, maybe didn't eclipse 1,000 yards this year, but is a 1,000-yard receiver and is very productive when he's the focal point of the offense. Could you imagine that trio to work with? You find a quarterback, maybe it is the Sam Darnold, maybe it's somewhere, Justin Fields is the other rumor, or Russell Wilson, depending on who Pittsburgh opts to kind of stick with there. Like, there's a lot that you can really have done over the next few days that can solidify your quarterback and make you okay with sending your first round selection over to Seattle to go and get a DK Metcalf. That when, again, you just have to get a running back at that point too, and you're off and running. You have yourself a pretty legitimate offense to run going into the 2025 season. So I'd love to see the Las Vegas Raiders with DK. Plus, DK Metcalf, don't get me wrong, I'd be excited to see him in a Patriots or Packers uniform, or even some of the other two teams here, but DK Metcalf in the silver and black, come on. Let's be real here. That would be disgusting, and I'm talking a good way. Another team I have on here is the Broncos. I'd say maybe the least likely of all the teams I have here. You obviously have Cortland Sutton. You have Denzel Mims, who's like the big deep threat home run hitter kind of guy for you. This is more so just me kind of in love with the idea of giving Bo Nix, who had a really strong rookie campaign, and giving him because Cortland Sutton is a number one, and you bring in DK Metcalf, and you're basically working number 1A, number 1B at that point, depending on the week, and you have yourself like a legitimate threatening trio of wide receivers. But this is like one of the least likely, but just this was more of like a I would love to see this kind of thing. And then, of course, I have the Chargers, which feel like a logical landing spot for him as well. As we talked about already previously when we were discussing Joey Bosa, you go in, you bring yourself Ladd McConkey, DK Metcalf through trade. You shore up and this was something courtesy of Daniel Jeremiah that I saw him point out on his podcast, and I actually really love, because you have the O-line, you have the head coach, you go get DCAF, you now have the wide receiver room. Tight end does need a bit of an upgrade in my eyes. But then if they somehow manage to land Omarion Hampton in the draft out of UNC, holy smokes. Are you kidding me? Like, come on. That is an offense that I would love to see battling in the AFC West with the Chiefs, with this up-and-coming Broncos team. Like, there's a lot to be excited about if you saw DK come in here and then they're able to land like one of those premier running backs, because Jim Harbaugh, he loves to run the ball. He loves to set the tone. And if you want a guy like, and Hampton had a fantastic combine, and there were reports coming out that maybe some teams even maybe have slotted him above Ashton Genty as the top running back in the draft class. The way I see LA right now, you go and somehow get DK and you can still draft Hampton as well. That would just be unbelievable work right there by Los Angeles, and that is a playoff caliber offense in my eyes. One that could absolutely beat you in a submission on the ground, but you can confidently air it out with a guy like McConkey and DK with Justin Herbert behind a very strong offensive line that unfortunately dealt with injuries last year. If they're healthy, like, that's an offense I'm not trying to mess with if I'm any defense in the NFL. Now, we'll dip out of that conversation and go into Chicago talk, because this is something that over the last few days I've just kind of been sitting on, and I genuinely can't believe with a team like the Patriots kind of just sitting back and watching this happen hasn't been as aggressive, or even like somewhat as aggressive as what Chicago's been doing here, because the work that they've already put in prior to free agency has been pretty awesome to watch when it comes to retooling this offensive line. So we look at this here. We've got ourselves Adam Schefter tweeting out, in 24 hours, the Bears now have agreed to trade a 2025 sixth-round pick to the Rams for Jonah Jackson and a 2026 fourth-round pick to the Chiefs for Joe Thuney. The Bears are sparing no expense to protect Caleb Williams. The thing that I need to highlight here is that 2025 sixth-round pick to the Rams and a 2026 fourth-round selection to the Chiefs. 2026, that's not this year, that's next year. That's basically like giving up a fifth or a sixth round pick in this year's draft class. So when you look at the compensation for the trades, you literally just went out and got two legitimate starting offensive guards. And while guard may not be a pressing need for the New England Patriots, Joe Thuney paired up with Onwenu over there, how do you not want that? Tooney's literally your guy. You drafted him. You brought him in, and for whatever reason, the Patriots let him walk. And so you watch him go for what amounts to like a fifth or a sixth round pick this year, all pro, back-to-back seasons, this year and the year prior. Didn't let up a singular sack this season as well. Shout out Chicago for that fleece, because I can't believe that they didn't have to give up more for that. And I do know that Tooney's contract maybe had a little bit of play in that there, and maybe guards aren't valued as much, but we're talking a back-to-back all-pro offensive guard that, in my eyes, is not slowing down in any capacity. And like, people will point to like, oh, look, well, he did in the Super Bowl. I'm like, yeah, they had him playing left tackle. He's a guard. Like, that's what he does, but he's a tough mother effer. He'll do what he has to do in the Super Bowl, and if that means play left tackle, he's going to play left tackle for you, because they were in a tough spot on the left side of that offensive line. I can't believe they were able to make these upgrades the way they were, and at such and basically it costs you nothing in the draft. And yeah, the money's there, but even after these moves, Chicago still sits on a comfortable $45 million in cap space. They were sitting around the $70 million mark, if I'm remembering correctly, before both of these trades. And like Jonah Jackson, we didn't even get into that. Like Jonah Jackson, yeah, you could point to last season not being great for him. Injuries obviously hurting his production, but Jonah Jackson's a legit starting offensive guard in the NFL as well. Like when he's healthy, he is one of the better himself. I don't know where you'd put him as far as like top 10, top 15, top 10, or top 5, something along those lines. But like I would definitely put him in the upper half of the NFL as far as offensive guard play is concerned. And you fixed almost your entire offensive line with 2 moves that cost you basically nothing. And now you open up so much for yourself going into free agency now, because you still, again, have $45 million to work with. There is some retooling that needs to be done, but it's not like you're paying out a ton of money to guys that you need to keep this offseason. It's basically just, how do we make this team better? And I've got to say, respect to Ben Johnson with where he started and what he's done so far, because you set yourself up now. You still need to work on a center, maybe figure out another tackle. Edge rusher to pair alongside Montez Sweat is a necessity. Getting, I would say, an interior defensive lineman as well to, again, work alongside Montez Sweat, because just the pass rush and the run defense as a whole up front there was not necessarily your strongest suit in Chicago. A running back, a tight end, more, I don't know if you want to call them secondary concerns. I might even put running back up a little bit higher on the list, because I do think you want to have a solid running game for a younger quarterback. I am of the belief if you can have a sound running game for your young quarterback, you're only helping yourself. So I would maybe even slide up running back as a little bit more of a pressing need there, just because I'm not really sure about Swift, and was Rashawn Johnson's the other guy that's there. If I'm remembering the backfield or not correctly in Chicago, let me know. But for me, you've really opened up the fact that you don't have to go into free agency now and just spend on O-line, spend on O-line, spend on O-line. Like, you can go in and spend on an edge rusher. You can go in and spend on whoever the best defensive tackle is, and still have money left over for any other depth pieces you need to get. And then on top of that, you still have the draft. That money's already allocated and pushed off to the side anyways as well for teams. So you're good. Like, this is more so just a tip my cap more than anything else, and also just kind of like a jaw on the floor. Can't believe it cost this little to get such massive upgrades for your offensive line. And again, just kind of a tip to the cap as far as what Ben Johnson has already got the Bears doing right now, because there is, yes, some more work to be done, but to get an all-pro back-to-back, mind you, coming off back-to-back all-pro nominations, not nominations, I'm sorry, he secured them. He was first-team all-pro both years. And then a guy like Jonah Jackson, who, again, I consider a legit guard in the NFL, someone who's familiar with what Ben Johnson does, played with him in Detroit. Like, you are setting yourself up for success. And this was exactly the way Chicago needed to do it. And the aggressiveness is what I really like. And you were aggressive, and it did not cost you a lot. So very impressed with what Chicago has done. Now, before we go, I do want to play a little bit of free agency matchmaker with you all. This is something that I've been working on the last few days, and yesterday's moves did throw a bit of a wrench in all that. So that's why I did want to, or moves, announcements, whatever you want to call some of them, because DK Metcalf technically hasn't moved. He's more of an announcement than anything else. But the Bosa thing, that kind of threw a wrench into this, but I decided to stick with the 5 guys I was going to work with here, because I thought it made for a really interesting discussion. Now, NFL.com posted a top 101 free agents list on Tuesday. It was written by Greg Rosenthal. Now, the current top 5 in order as of this recording here, it initially had Zach Bond a part of it, but he ended up signing an extension yesterday, so it kicked him off the list, and we went with 1, 2, 3, I think 5 and 6, or 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6. I think Bond might have been number 3. Now, what we're going to do here is run through these 5 guys, and we're going to talk about teams that could be interested, and then selecting the team that I do think they wind up with here. So, first person on the list, coming in at number 1, is Milton Williams. Milton Williams is a name that I did not expect to see at the top of this list, because there are a few other guys that I like a little bit more than him that I would have put atop of the list, but he seems to be gaining a lot of steam right now, and it really has to do with how he looked in the NFC. Like, he had a good season overall, but more of a rotational role type of guy. I think he only had 7 starts technically this past season, but I mean, when you look at what he did in the NFC Championship and in the Super Bowl, I can understand where people are coming from here, especially with his age. Teams like the Panthers, the Cardinals, and the Patriots make a ton of sense for me here. And in my eyes, it's really going to come down to just who's more than willing to give him the highest dollar amount possible to get him in their door. Now, for me, out of those three teams, I decided to settle on the Carolina Panthers. While the Arizona Cardinals definitely need upgrades along the defensive line, and the New England Patriots themselves also definitely need upgrades on the defensive line, especially with there is a bit of an uneasy feeling flowing through at least like the New England media right now about Christian Barmore and what happens with him and the blood clot situation he's dealing with. So I'm hoping, obviously, all ends up going well and he continues to play and it doesn't end up being an issue, but nobody feels like 100% certain about the direction that's going. So even more pressing, I would say, on the Patriots end than Arizona. But Carolina here, after getting rid of Brian Burns, really needs to step up and try to, and this is not a make good by any means, because I don't think I would put Milton Williams and Brian Burns in the same category of effective pass rushers, but I will say that this at least goes in the direction of trying to make good on that move, because once Carolina got rid of Brian Burns, this past season was not good for them. Finishing the season 29th in sacks and 32nd in pressure rate, you basically killed your pass rush getting rid of Brian Burns last offseason. And on top of that, you got rid of him a year too late because you had 2 firsts on the table and you opted to not trade him. And then the trade compensation you got the following year was awful, considering what you could have had. So for me, I like the Carolina Panthers here. They've got to do something about the pass rush over there. And Milton Williams, a guy who has played really well over the last few years and really flourished in the Eagles system, I think would be a nice upgrade for them over there in Carolina. The guy that is number 2 on this list here, Ronnie Stanley, the left tackle from Baltimore. A lot of people seem to think he's going to hit free agency because this is a team that has just so much talent over there in Baltimore that there's only so much money that can go around, and it feels like Ronnie Stanley is working his way to hitting free agency. Now, I have 2 teams pegged for this one here. My third team is Baltimore because in my eyes, there just feels like there would be some way that they could figure it out, but the 2 actual teams as far as new destinations are concerned are the Patriots and the Chiefs. The Patriots, one of the worst, if not the worst, offensive lines last season. You absolutely need to address left tackle. And Ronnie Stanley, coming off of a nice, healthy year, could be the guy you need at that left tackle spot. That also doesn't force you to have to go into the draft and need to spend what feels like half of your selections on offensive linemen just to field a viable offense next year. So Patriots make a lot of sense there. And then there's the Chiefs, and we kind of talked about this earlier too, with Joe Thuney having to play left tackle for you in the Super Bowl because of injuries and just where you were. That's not ideal. Now, Ronnie Stanley, this feels very similar to what they did a few years ago once they lost to Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl. Offensive line looked really bad. A lot of injuries dealt there. They went and they spent a lot of money. Orlando Brown Jr., I believe, is who they went and they picked up. This time around, it's Ronnie Stanley. This would make a lot of sense for me here. And with Patrick Mahomes and the way his contract is set up, you can restructure and just move money around, it seems, with that 10-year deal he's on. And the next thing you know, boom, $25 to $30 million in cap space is all of a sudden opened up. And I mean, the way I see it right now, it's basically just a lot of teams just handing out money well in advance of when they were supposed to lower that cap number. And if there's anyone that I'm more than willing to just hand cash to as an NFL owner, it's probably Patrick Mahomes above everybody else. $35 million in cash to drop that money down as a signing bonus. Sure, here you go, Mahomes. Like, why not? You're already 3 Super Bowls deep with us. Here's another $35 million ahead of schedule kind of deal. So, I mean, the Chiefs and the Patriots, I do think both have very viable cases for going after Ronnie Stanley. And on the Chiefs front, you could maybe offer him a little bit less, but also the opportunity to chase for that ring. Whereas the Patriots, again, you desperately need to fix this offensive line, and Ronnie Stanley would go a long way to doing that. You have to pay him probably, like, I would assume $3 to $5 million more than whatever Kansas City was going to offer him. You have to pay him, and it's probably going to be more than what he should be valued at this current stage in his career, age, injury history wise, like obviously production when he's healthy and he's playing, one of the best at that position. But there are other things you could consider that could maybe knock his value a bit. But if you're New England, yeah, Mike Vrabel's exciting. Sure, Drake May looks positive for the team at the quarterback spot. but there's no guarantee they're even sniffing the playoffs over the next 2 seasons, let alone a Super Bowl appearance. So you have Super Bowl on one end, money on the other. In my eyes, the Patriots, with $100 and essentially $30 million in cap space, are probably about to spend near 25 to somewhere in the middle of 25 to 30 million. I'm not saying you're going to pay Ronnie Stanley 30 million. I'm just saying it's somewhere in that range there. You're probably paying him like 25 or so million or more to get him on your roster. You are paying him very high numbers to get him to come to you. You have to give him an offer he legitimately could not in good conscience say no to, because the money is just that crazy. You have the money to spend. I know maybe the idea of giving that much money to a singular player might not sound attractive to Patriots fans. That is fair, but the way the cap has jumped over the last 2 years with $55 million in growth, just imagine what the next 2 or 3 years are going to be like and where this cap room is going to be. We're going to be flirting with nearly $350 million in cap space over the next 2 or 3 years alone. What you pay Ronnie Stanley today will not feel like anything 2 or 3 years down the road. And at this point, it's about building a legitimate offensive line in front of Drake May and keeping him protected on his blind side. The next person, this one, again, I can't remember the numbering exactly. I think Bond was number 3 and then Darnold was number 4. If not, the numbers are flipped. I don't know. You can find it on NFL.com if you want the correct numbers. But the next person on Greg Rosenthal's list was Sam Darnold. Now, I have 3 teams in mind: Giants, Raiders, Titans. When trying to match up Sam Darnold with a quarterback mind that makes sense and is, I guess, similar to Kevin O'Connell, I fall towards the Titans. But then I also think, what about a guy like Brian Daboll? Quarterback whisperer, helped Josh Allen get to where he is. Yeah, it's been kind of a mess in New York, but I would not really put it on Daboll. I think that's more the Maras forcing Daniel Jones on him, and we all know what Daniel Jones is at this point as a quarterback. And you got a team like the Raiders, who, again, like I talked about, quarterback away from maybe putting together a competent offense, plus an addition like DK Metcalf, and next thing you know, you get a running back in the draft, and you're off and running as an offense altogether. So it could start in free agency as far as addressing that there. I went back and forth a lot on this, and for the Raiders, I don't know if Las Vegas wants to go with a Sam Darnold, because they've been kind of doing that, like just picking up a quarterback thing since Derek Carr left. And they've been very indecisive on paying too much money to people that are in the league already after letting Derek Carr go. I feel like they want to draft somebody. That's just the vibe that I'm getting and the gist of what seems to be going on. I could be completely off on this, and maybe they are very much in on Sam Darnold, but I feel like they want to draft someone. That's just kind of the feeling that I'm getting here. And that's why they've been kind of reluctant to pay other people in free agency the last few years. When I look at the Giants, the situation kind of makes sense, especially if they work on rebuilding the offensive line over there as well. And you expect that this offense ends up being better, minus Daniel Jones now, and with some improvements there. But seeing Daniel Jones go back to the New York market is part of the reason why I kind of am shying away from them, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Then you have the Tennessee Titans, and this is where I think my heart lies for this selection here, because you look at what Tennessee kind of has going right now. Pretty competent defense. Offense, though, the quarterback situation just was not it for them last year. I really like Brian Callahan. I think he's a great young offensive mind, similar vein of a Kevin O'Connell, to be able to have him come in and work within this offense. You already have Calvin Ridley, and depending on how you feel on him, whether he's still a number 1 or maybe just a really good number 2, and you have to find somebody else to pair alongside him, we'll see what happens there. But I mean, you do have Calvin Ridley. I also like the idea of bringing back Nick Westbrook-Akine. You add to the offensive line a bit. You have Tony Pollard, who is a capable running back. If he has a better passing game, I would assume running lanes open up a little bit more, and we get more of the running back we saw in Dallas coming out of going into free agency when he signed with Tennessee. So for me, I really like the idea of him going to Tennessee. Just head coaching mind, situation is pretty good. You don't need a ton of work to get that offense in a position where you can feel comfortable with where they are. And again, Sam Darnold is young enough that if You get Sam Darnold before the last 2 games that he played this past season, Sam Darnold, you're feeling pretty good about what's going on. There might be a ceiling with Darnold, and maybe just when the lights are on the brightest, he cracks under the pressure, but that was, I would say, the closest he's gotten to those bright lights, and he at least has that experience now. And my hope is that if he's going to continue to grow, which we saw from him this year, that was a massive leap for him. You go from a guy that was either a backup quarterback or fumbling around with the Jets before he was released by them. You go from there to now all this growth last season working with Kevin O'Connell and even some of the work he had with Kyle Shanahan the year prior in that 49ers offense. Now getting the opportunity to play in the bright lights, yeah, it was not great. It was not pretty. Definitely wish it could have gone a lot better for him, but he has the experience now, and he can take that with him and continue to grow going forward. And I think there's an opportunity for that, and the brightest opportunity for that would be in Tennessee. Josh Sweat's the 4th guy on this list here, and this is one, Chargers, Cardinals, and Titans again on here. Cardinals we also talked about earlier as well, but I ultimately gave Milton Williams to another team. Now, the Chargers. I had this put together before the Joey Bosa news because I was thinking, okay, Joey Bosa, Josh Sweat, that would be really fun. Now, I'm really starting to think Khalil Mack returns, Josh Sweat, and then you have yourself one hell of a unit of pass rushers there on the edges of your defense. That would be the Chargers' case at this point, especially with the money now really opened up for them. Cardinals, as we discussed earlier, 29th that was the Panthers, I'm sorry. They were like middle of the pack in sacks and pressure rate, but they definitely need improvement there. The way I see it, the Titans, there is a good case for them as well, especially with Harold Landry potentially going to walk, but we're tying up a lot of money with Sam Darnold going to them, so I think that's where that kind of gets lost there. I really like the idea of him going to Arizona. With them 4th most in cap currently right now, Arizona has the money, and this is a guy that I could see teams getting into a bit of a bidding war over because he seems like he has evolved into one of the top-end pass rushers in the NFL, and you can't have enough of those. You can't have enough of that in general. So I could see the Cardinals being the one to secure them out of these 3 teams or just any other teams looking to bid on him there. They have the money to do it. They need a big name producer on that defensive line to take them from, again, middle of the pack to even lower 3rd somewhat to being maybe like a top 12 team in the NFL and really start to push those numbers towards being a competitive team on the defensive side of the football. And then lastly, we got Chris Godwin. We've talked about him a little bit already, but picking where he goes. The 3 teams I have in mind that I've seen him pegged to, the Patriots, very much talked about. The Steelers, this is one that I wasn't really anticipating until I saw a lot of people connecting dots with that and just what it would mean to have him paired alongside a guy like George Pickens kind of makes sense with what has been going on in Tampa Bay, him and Mike Evans paired together. And then, of course, you have a team like the Giants who need improvement in the wide receiver room. I'm a little bit torn on how this one goes because I really like the idea of Chris Godwin in Pittsburgh. The more I've read about it and the more I've kind of rolled the idea in my mind of just how it would work itself out, especially if they opt to go with Justin Fields. You want to have as much talent to work with him in the passing game as possible. Then a team like the Patriots, who legitimately don't have a number 1 and may not even have a number 2, just kind of depends on Pop Douglas's progression from this point forward. There is a lot to consider, but I do like the idea of the Giants maybe securing a wide receiver like a Chris Godwin for the sake of having a accomplished veteran wide receiver that has won a Super Bowl working alongside Malik Neighbors. So there is a good case to be made for each and every team, but I do think I'm going to go with the Giants on this one here. There are injury concerns with him, and we discussed that earlier as well, that I think could scare some teams off. And I do think that with that in mind, teams might not be willing to bid as high for him, or just maybe altogether might not have as much interest in him. And now that there's conversations surrounding DK Metcalf, maybe teams are a little bit more preoccupied trying to make that potential deal happen. Like, this could be one of those things where a team like the Giants, who are only 13th in cap space in total right now, could maybe use that to their advantage, where they, again, bring a guy like him to come in and work alongside. And with Darius Slayton set to hit free agency as well, like, this one makes sense. You let Slayton go. You don't have to worry about paying him because it sounds like he's going to have a pretty good wide receiver market. Like, there's a lot kind of working in the Giants' favor for this one here. And I like the idea of pairing Malik Neighbors with a vet like Chris Godwin, who's gotten it done. And then whatever you do at quarterback, in my eyes, in this situation here, you're probably drafting a quarterback at number 3. That's what you're going to set your young quarterback up with. A young, up-and-coming stud like Malik Neighbors. You're also going to have yourself, of course, Chris Godwin. Running back needs to get situated. Offensive line needs to get situated. That is stuff you can work on between free agency and the draft as well. But you at least know you have yourself a solid duo at wide receiver for the young quarterback that you're going to potentially have coming in. But that's how I'm looking at for those top 5 guys in free agency. And that's pretty much all I got for you all today. So if you made it to the end, as always, I greatly appreciate it. Comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts and opinions on everything we talked about today. But as always, appreciate it. If you made it to the very end, I'll catch you all next time. Have a good one.